So it's my pleasure to introduce our first panel for the morning, which is called Safety First, How New York's 2025 Fire Code Has Set the Standard in Energy Storage Safety. So we're kicking off today's program with a topic that's absolutely foundational to everything else we'll discuss today to do with safety. When New York adopted its 2025 Fire Code updates earlier this year, it set a new national benchmark for battery energy storage safety. These standards reflect years of collaboration among fire professionals, engineers, state agencies, and developers, all working together to make sure that as energy storage expands, it does so with the highest levels of safety, transparency, and public confidence. This effort goes beyond just the fire code, though. It's about ensuring that the people who live near these projects and the first responders who protect them know that every system is designed, built, and monitored to the most rigorous standards anywhere in the country. Today's discussion in this panel will highlight the collaborative work of New York's Interagency Fire Safety Working Group, lessons learned from real-world site inspections, and the policies and technical standards that continue to evolve as we lead the nation in safe, responsible energy storage deployment. We are fortunate to be joined by a group of true experts who have been at the center of this work, and to guide the conversation, please join me in welcoming David Sandbank, who's a Senior Vice President of Integrated Energy Solutions at NYSERDA, and whose leadership has been instrumental in advancing both safety and innovation in energy storage across the state. A quick note on the Q&A, you'll see these QR codes for each panel on the screen come up. They'll appear again at the end of every panel. Just open your phone's camera, point it at the code, and tap the link and type your question there.
Thank you, Marguerite. I appreciate it, and what a pleasure being here today, and just really want to thank Stony Brook University for hosting us and a magnificent presentation on what you're doing in innovation. I learned a lot this morning already. Again, my name is David Sandbank. I'm the Senior Vice President at NYSERDA. I oversee different portions of solar energy storage, clean transportation, and energy efficiency in homes and businesses. I'd like to introduce our panel. If you could all please, it's such a great esteemed panel. I'm really flattered to be here on stage with you. Can you please all come up and take your seats? And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to read your short bios while I'm standing up here, and then I'll come down and join you to get our panel going. All right, as you can see, we have 4 people on the panel today. I'm going to start with Casey Grant. Casey, can you please raise your hand so everyone knows who the marvelous Casey Grant is? Thank you. Casey is the Executive Director of D&S Research Associates and Engineers, specializing in research and technical support for the fire, protection, and emergency response community. Casey has spent more than 3 decades shaping national standards and advancing fire safety innovation. Previously, he served as the Executive Director of Fire Protection Research Foundation, Secretary of the National Fire Protection Association Standards Councils, and Assistant Chief Engineer, as well as Chair of the National Fire Protection Association. So everybody, please give Casey a round of applause for joining us on this panel. Nick, can you please raise your hand? Welcome, Nick. And Nick and I go back a whole year and a half together. We're both members of the Fire Safety Working Group, and I have learned a lot from Nick and his team at ESRG. So Nick is the Director of Engineering and Battery Energy Storage Expert for Energy Safety Response Group. You might hear them again on the panel. We call it ESRG. He is a licensed protection engineer in the state of New York. Previously, he served as the Assistant Deputy Director for FDNY's Sustainability Unit, where he played a key role in the review and approval of battery energy storage systems across New York City. Nick has been a voting member on several UL standards and committees, including UL 1973, UL 1741, UL 9540, and UL 9548 for anybody who's keeping track. He also has conducted extensive research in battery energy storage technologies and failure modes. He's a subject matter expert who developed and implemented an FDNY rule governing the safe installation of battery energy storage throughout New York City. Please give Nick a loud round of applause. Next is Chief Loftus, who I have had numerous calls with but never met in person. Chief, thank you for coming here today. Chief Loftus is in charge of the Hazardous Material Operation Division for the Fire Department of the City of New York, FDNY, a role in which he oversees the department's strategic and tactical response to lithium-ion battery systems, energy storage installations. Chief Loftus rose through the ranks of the FDNY Uniformed Service, bringing deep experience from both field operations and incident command. Prior to his current appointment, he served as the battalion chief of the FDNY. Please, now we're going over to, I will want to say, we had another panelist that was supposed to arrive today, Andrew Smith, the town of Riverhead Fire Marshal. Unfortunately, due to an incident that he would attend to, which is the nature of the business, he wasn't able to join us today. So I'm going to move over to Bruce Johnson, who was scheduled to be on the panel, but coincidentally, what used to be the Riverhead Fire Marshal. So he's a great person who can play different roles on the panel today. Bruce, thanks for coming. Let me get into your, what I say brief bio, but it expands many years and a lot of expertise. Bruce is a regulatory service manager in UL Solutions, Codes and Regulatory Services Department, where he oversees UL's U.S. regulatory operations. Bruce is one of the UL's leading subject matter experts on lithium-ion batteries and serves on several key ICC and NFPA technical code development committees. Bruce served 30-plus years in the Long Island Fire Emergency Services and Life Safety arena, beginning as the volunteer firefighter and retiring as the Riverhead Fire Marshal in 2008. So please give Bruce a round of applause for joining us today. All right, I'm just going to give you a brief intro of why I feel we're on the stage today and what I hope this audience can get out of why we're here today, and then I'm going to have a seat amongst my colleagues. Through the establishment of the Fire Safety Working Group in the summer of 2023, it was formed by Governor Kathy Hochul in response to 3 battery storage fires in the state of New York. We took a deep dive into the standards that existed at the time and developed what we're here to talk about right now, recommendations for the 2025 Fire Code. However, I really want to emphasize that we didn't create these recommendations in a vacuum. We worked tirelessly and really hard and brought together national subject matter experts across state agencies, fire departments, nationally recognized testing labs, standard bodies, manufacturers for battery energy storage, industries, developers. We spent months talking to them, reviewing data, understanding what their issues are, including AHJs. We also went out in the field and we inspected 57 of the largest storage projects that are in service right now to see what lessons learned we can have from that. That combination of expert input and on-the-ground inspections is really what shaped these fire code recommendations and that the Code Council adopted this summer, which will go into effect January 1 of 2026. So today, we've convened these panel of experts representing engineering, field response testing, and code enforcement. And I'd like to start by hearing from each one of you. Let's focus on the codes and let's explore them and understand what the meanings are behind them and how we got there. So what I'm going to do, and I don't want to bore anybody, so I'm going to be really quick about this. There are 11 new codes that we have in the 2025 code that address battery energy storage safety. What I want to do is call out several of them so that I would love to go around the horn here or down the line from your panelists and understand from your unique experience and perspective which codes stand out to you and why they're important. You ready for that? I'm throwing a curveball. We didn't go over this in any preliminary conversation. So one of them is require independent peer reviews for all projects. The other is requiring qualified personnel available to dispatch within 15 minutes of an incident, able to arrive on a scene within 4 hours. 3, ensure the battery management system, we'll hear that a lot, we abbreviate that to BMS, data is monitored 24/7, staffed by a network operations center. Critical failures notifications should be immediately communicated. 4, require monitoring of fire detection systems. 5, include requirement for emergency response plans and the requirement to train local first responders. There are more than that. There's 11. I named 4 or 5. I lost track because I'm so excited, sorry. But I would love to first discuss those with the team. So let me join you and sit down, and we will go over those. Nick, you look like you're chomping at the bit here. I'm not going to get in your way.
You're going to make me like pick between my favorite children.
Yeah, what from your perspective, and again, I just want to remind everybody that Nick and I, we're both members of the fire safety working group that was assembled in reaction to the 3 incidents we had here in New York State. And so, Nick, you know all of these really well. Let me start with you and ask your opinion.
That's a great question. First of all, before we get started, David, I appreciate it. And I'm honored to be here with such distinguished members of this panel, but also in my alma mater, Stony Brook University. I graduated here from mechanical engineering back in 2012, so go Seawolves. Any students in here? Or no, they're all in class, right? That's Stony Brook kids, they don't cut class. No. So, yeah, how do we pick? What really sticks out to me, I think, is some of the lessons learned that we extracted from the New York City Fire Department, and that's having our hazard support personnel available immediately, a subject matter expert. And I think that is one of, I don't want to, I mean, they're all very important, but I think that is a tremendous leap forward and something that we took from industry best practices, something that we took from the New York City Fire Code. And I think it's a really good safety feature to put in there amongst all of them. I mean, I could sit here and talk at length on all of those, but I think that one definitely stands out.
Thanks, Nick. Bruce, what are your thoughts?
Oh, thank you. And as Nick said, it's an honor to be invited to be part of this panel, and that we're all here to learn together. I think there's a lot of information that we hopefully can share. But I think the thing that stands out to me most is the management of these systems and kind of tying in the code requirements related to the permitting, the commissioning initially, but that emergency response personnel and the training requirements I think are really key. In the codes, we use this term AHJ a lot, authority having jurisdiction, and that can vary. There can be a lot of authorities having jurisdiction over energy storage projects and siting, including building officials, electrical inspectors, the fire marshals, of course. But the other piece of that where there really needs to be this collaboration or connection and sharing of information is with the emergency responders. And today, Chief Loftus can talk a lot about what New York City has done. Biggest, greatest fire department in the world, the FDNY. But across New York State, we have a lot of volunteer fire departments. I served on one for a long time earlier in my career. And one of the takeaways that I have, particularly with an energy storage system, the emergency responders, whether they're professional career, professional volunteer, they should not be learning about that facility in their jurisdiction when they get the first 911 call. There needs to be involvement right from the beginning so that they understand what is being deployed in their jurisdictions, and they have an opportunity to learn and train on how they're going to respond and the actions that would be appropriate, and then that should continue. And as David mentioned, the code requires that training. That code requires the opportunity to have an annual site visit with those responders. So I think that is really, really a key to making this a success. So thank you for that question.
Thanks, Bruce. Chief Loftus, I'm assuming you're going, David, tell me something new. We already do this at FDNY, right? So I'm just curious about your perspective here. When you heard me read out some of those codes that are currently adopted, how does that relate to what you're doing at FDNY?
I'm going to start off too. I'm going to echo what everyone else said. I'm honored to be here with such an esteemed group of professionals. So the FDNY, I'm going to talk as a chief, just in general. So when I'm a chief at a building, let's say that Charles Wang went on fire, hopefully it doesn't, but if it did, and I'm the chief outside, this is big, right? This is a big area. Well, the person I need is the building engineer. If I have a building go on fire in Manhattan, for example, I had worked in Manhattan, I'm looking for the engineer of that building. If I had a Con Ed facility go on fire, I'm looking for what they call the white hat, the subject matter expert, right? I want someone there to explain to me kind of what this building is, what are we dealing with, so on and so forth. For me, out of all the codes that were mentioned, the most important one is a certificate of fitness holder. So a certificate of fitness holder is my subject matter expert. That's someone that I know you said 15 minutes, but realistically, the ones that I've dealt with have been on the phone immediately. We make an emergency information card. That's something we do internally for every battery energy storage system and other things that we have, major buildings and so on and so forth. We have pre-incident guidelines. So what I do there is I reach out to the certificate of fitness holder. Before this site is built, we visit it. As it's being built, we visit it. Before it's commissioned, we visit it. We get the local units to come in, the local chief, the local fire department. It's very important from my point of view to have an eye on this beforehand, right? And have education. That's what I want to talk about today is the education that I learned when anything comes into New York City, whether it's a battery energy storage system or it's going to be hydrogen or it's going to be whatever comes that way, right? I have to educate myself for one reason, and one reason only, is the safety of the citizens and the safety of the firefighters. And I take that role serious. And thank you for being here. Thank you.
Thanks, Chief Loftus. And I think it might help because I know that this panel has educated me on this, but I think it's important that the audience is aware as well. And Casey, I don't know if you want to include this in your answer or if, Nick, you want to take this. I do want to hear your answer to the question that we're going down the line on, but I think because Chief Loftus brought up certificate of fitness holder, and the code says hazard personnel, can someone make a clear understanding of what those two are and what it means in New York City and outside of New York City?
And I assume that I can handle that as well, and you can add to that, Nick and others. But first of all, I do want to say thank you for having me. This is a distinguished panel. I'm honored to be here. I am one of those people that has the bigger perspective, and I do see what New York State has done, and it's good. And I want to just address that a little further, but you've already heard it in the keynote and elsewhere. But I clearly see that from my perspective, my background at 3.5 decades at the National Fire Protection Association. We were and are the custodians of those key documents like NFPA 855, which are the primary feedstock as national minimum baseline standards for what gets adopted into code in places like New York State, in New York City, and elsewhere. But it gives us that important baseline developed by professionals with balanced committees and with public input across the board to address these complex technical topics like battery energy storage facilities. So, and that's where we are with NFPA 855, which is an important piece of feedstock into the New York State Fire Code. And I will just add, right at the beginning of Section 1207, it talks about you must follow all these parts of 1207 in the Uniform Fire Code and NFPA 855. So it's included in all these requirements as well. So just as a little bit of one additional housekeeping thing I do want to mention, I was asked to do a recap at the end, so I'm taking notes here, which is why I have my clipboard open, so forgive me on that. I do want to just address, as we went down the line here, one of the things that was not mentioned, and it will come up later, but you talked about notification and sort of detection and sort of all this. That is addressed very well in the new fire code, and it's not only the traditional fire protection applications we use today with what I'll call traditional fire detection and heat detection and so forth, requiring central stations and all the other things that we require. And there's a lot of detail there as you go into the related codes and those requirements. But it also involves the battery management system, and David, you alluded to that earlier. But I just want to say, when we look at grid scale battery energy storage, and you heard in the opening session, the keynote, how different we're looking at when we're talking grid scale and consumer batteries and micromobility devices and all this other stuff out there. It's different, and it's really different with the code requirements as well. But I am not aware of anything as highly monitored out there in our world today, except commercial aircraft out there, where they are monitoring every rivet on those things as they fly around. They're transferring that back by satellite data for maintenance purposes. And we're doing the same thing here with the battery management systems on battery energy storage systems. They're incredibly monitored by those who are responsible for the operation and the manufacturer and the product developers and so forth. And they have the ability, they're monitoring these remotely. And yeah, a lot of that is for degradation of equipment and the normal lifespan, and they want it to operate optimally throughout its lifespan. So we have this incredible wealth of additional inputs. And in fact, the bigger issue is making sure that nuisance alarms, which is important for the fire department, emergency responders, are properly addressed so that you're not responding on every single thing. And but this is where we're at in terms of the notification side. We have this with this technology today, and the good news is I look at the New York State Fire Code, it's leveraging that, and it has requirements in there for that has to be part of the whole portfolio of notification for the emergency response community and when there's a real problem. So I just want to, just wrap that by saying, when I look at the New York State Fire Code, and it has addressed, from everything I can see, all of the recommendations from the Fire Safety Working Group. And in fact, in one area, it looks like it's exceeded some of the other requirements, and I'll pick on New York City. I'm not sure New York City has the closed-circuit TV requirements like the state code does, which, again, it's like in today's world, you always want closed-circuit TV. I mean, we can do it with our Ring doorbells or whatever. So I'm just going to wrap up by saying I look at the New York State Code, and I see this as I travel around the country and the world. It is robust, it is strong, it is detailed, it's relevant, it's comprehensive. And I'm not sure what's not being addressed here that really does need to be addressed in detail. You talked about the certificate of fitness. I intentionally, and this is where you hear this a lot with New York City, certificate of fitness, certificate of fitness. It's a very important part of it. And I know, Chief.
Can you explain, Casey, that's an FDNY requirement?
That is an FDNY. That is a city requirement. Thank you. Because that's where I immediately looked and said, well, wait a minute. This is hugely important on what we sometimes loosely call, Chief, game day. Like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And
could you just explain to the audience what exactly the responsibility maybe Chief Loftus could do of the certificate of fitness?
Sure. Well, let me just set the overview here, and then I'm going to turn it over to get into the details as you deem appropriate. But the New York State Code, I see, replicates that. As I look at the different sections, and I don't see that it uses that term, certificate of fitness. Yeah, but I do see it's like, oh, it's got all similar requirements, and that on game day, somebody's going to be there. And I've worked in a lot of power plants, nuclear, coal, gas, oil, all of this. In nuclear, you don't just go running in there. You don't. And that's the same with a lot of industrial applications, or in a lot of, like you said, Chief, this facility. Who is there? And that's where, that certificate of fitness is hugely important. As far as more details, David, I'll defer to how you want to go further with that with other panelists.
No, Casey, thanks. I really appreciate that. Because what you're saying, is what I've been learning, right? The issue was not the data. The data points, I can't even remember what it is, hundreds a second that we can collect from a battery energy storage project. The problem we needed to solve for was how to take that data, right, and put it into a process that works to either prevent an incident or handle an incident if it were to happen in the best way possible, right? And obviously, the Fire Safety Working Group really worked hand in hand with the experts at FDNY to learn what are they doing, how are they doing it right. So some of the titles are different, right? Certificate of Fitness is very similar to hazard personnel, which is in the 2025 code. But maybe let me turn to Nick and ask to say the difference because, and just to remind everybody, I think this is important for the 15 minutes a subject matter expert has to answer the phone who understands that project. Right. 4 hours later, hazard personnel they're not putting the fire out, they are the subject matter expert about that project. It could be one person, it could be two different people. But Nick, please.
No, that was perfect, David, because I think that's a big distinction. Both certificate of fitness holder and hazard support personnel, all in the same. It's the same like when Casey mentioned 855, right? 855, International Fire Code, New York State, the 2025 code. It's like the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. It's all the same, right? It's just different forms. So hazard support personnel, right? The fire department's going to be there. They're going to show up. They're going to get in their bunker gear. They're going to go to their staging area. We're going to follow the procedures for the emergency response plan. The hazard support personnel, they're not going to show up and grab the hand lines and stretch hoses and connect to the hydrant. What they're going to be is that phone a friend, that subject matter expert, right? We're talking about BMS and hundreds of thousands of data points, right? It's a lot of information. It's a lot of information overload. And Casey has a great analogy for this. And I think it is what you've said with a fighter pilot, right? And information that a fighter pilot needs, right? They need to know very specific information, and they need to know that information quickly. That hazard support personnel is that support, is that subject matter expert that understands the technology, understands all the fire protection features of that technology, understands the site itself and the site layout. They're going to be available 24/7 over the phone, whether that's in the middle of the night or in the middle of the day, to provide that support to the fire department. Because when they roll up and they get to a facility that they've been trained on, I think that's a critical part of it, is we've already had our preliminary site walkthrough and our training, but you're rolling up to this. We have a picture here kind of in the background. What's going on? What's inside the box, right? If I don't see anything from the outside, if I've got a notification from my automatic fire alarm system, but I don't see anything. I think this was one of the biggest challenges when I was at the FDNY, when I was working with Chief Loftus and Paul Rogers and some of my older bosses. When we were there, and one of the biggest challenges that we saw is you roll up to a scene. If it's not comfortably on fire, we have no idea what's going on inside, right? Are we trending upwards in temperature? Are we trending downwards? Did we have a thermal runaway? Do we have an atmosphere in there that might be hazardous? And I think that information can be extracted, can be provided to the subject matter expert, and that subject matter expert is that link, right, that assistance to the fire department to help them make the best decisions possible. And on top of that, there are also what we call handoff after the event is concluded, or once we decide that the event is benign. It's another sort of reputable person, a reputable company that the fire department can say, you guys watch this system. We have a ton of work to do. We got to return to quarters. It puts a responsibility on that facility to close out that event and stay there just in case anything happens, but also to start the, whatever next steps, potentially decommissioning plan. So a lot of things that we took from FDNY, the New York State Working Group, we said this is great. We can't call it a certificate of fitness because we can't go down to headquarters and go take the test, but we pretty much took everything there, right? And also implemented some more stuff. They have to understand the incident command structure. They also have to be technically, aware of the technology and really knowledgeable about it.
Thanks, Nick. I was going to cover this later, but I think maybe because we're talking about this, can I rely on either you, Casey, or anybody else on the panel to describe to the audience, if an incident were to happen, what is the process at which it goes through? Because we have to talk about the Network Operations Center. How does that go? Who filters the alerts? Who shows up? If you could just walk us through that, I would appreciate that, and maybe the audience would as well.
Well, I can start, and again, the rest of the panel can fill that in. There are requirements, not only, again, for what I'll call traditional detection for some anomaly, fire or smoke, but we have these other requirements on network operations centers that the operator must keep 24/7 with qualified personnel monitoring of this equipment. And And I can't speak for all the systems that are out there, but the few that I have seen behind the curtain, they are recording literally tens of thousands of points of data to the point where it's like, whoa, wait a minute, there's a lot here. But they have these algorithms that they're trying to keep an eye on just normal performance and degradation. And that gets me back to that, commercial aircraft parallel. Because I'm not aware of any other thing out there that is monitored on this level. But that's where, and by the way, to just step back, Nick, the term that is rising up in the code world is data-informed fireground management, where it's like, well, wait a minute, even on game day, we have access to this information, and this is where that subject matter expert, say, similar to the certificate of fitness in New York City, they're joined at the hip with incident command at the scene, who is in charge of what's going on here, but you rely on that person as a key piece of your inputs in terms of what actions you take in terms of handling the event.
Thanks, Keith. So Chief Loftus, so let's say you have an incident in New York City, right? Can you walk us through? You're an operational person, right? That's what you do for a living, and you work with FDNY. Tell us what would happen.
So we're familiar with the sites. So there's the HAZMAT battalion would go. We have a chief that's called the Emerging Technologies Chief. He would respond. We'd take the specialized units, which is called Special Operations Command and HAZMAT. They would go and visit the site. The main thing is the local units that are going to respond there first. My personal thing is I have an emergency information card. That card it's 2 pages. I could share it with everyone here. It has a lot of data on it. The thing I'm looking for, most important, is my subject matter expert. So in the city, we call it the certificate of fitness holder. I want to get in contact with that person right away. Hey, what's the state of charge we have? What's burning? What's the chemistry that I have? I want to get as much information as possible before I get to the scene. Now, there'll be units getting to the scene right off the bat there. I use them as recon. Right? We have a whole bulletin written on this, what they're supposed to do. And a lot of it's communication, gathering communication. We don't want anyone entering the site, right? That's very important. We've gone over, we've educated ourselves with not just sites that have failed in New York, but around the nation and around the world. And that's important. That's I think the education process of when something comes new, it's my job to get as much data as possible. And that's what I go on, is data, information. I talk to the fire departments that had it. We send people up to locations. I just got a call from the chief of department last time. There was something that went down in Boulder City, I think I think it's Boulder City, Nevada or California. But he said, do you want to go to it? I said, no, we have information. We have a large web, right? And that's to gather all this information. So when I go on scene with my firefighters, I could keep them safe. I could keep the civilians safe. And I feel that I have enough data to manage the situation. Excuse me, manage the situation.
Thanks, Chief Loftus. I just was Bruce, I definitely want you to go next. What I want to make sure we address as well is there could be, pardon me, some local fire departments in the audience here going, that's fine as well, but we don't have those resources, right? Some of us are volunteer firefighters, and I think we need to speak to that and how the codes address that. But Bruce, please.
Thank you, David. So, following up on that, I was fortunate when Nick was still working at the FDNY to represent UL on one of the first advisory committees for the creation of that certificate of fitness. And again, it's a very collaborative process that FDNY runs. They bring in all the subject matter experts, and they say, we want to create this certificate of fitness so that Chief Loftus and the FDNY will have all that information. And part of that advisory group working with the FDNY staff is to look at, first of all, what information is needed for operations. What do we need from that subject matter expert? What level of expertise, what level of experience? The group actually created training material that was required, and the other piece of the certificate of fitness, which is one difference than the fire code, is that a certificate of fitness holder passes an examination in New York City. so that they've actually proven that they have competency through passing that examination. And the test was developed by the subject matter expert panel. But where I think the correlation comes into the New York State Code, as David mentioned earlier, we're going to get into a little bit of the details, but all of the things that come from that certificate of fitness program from New York, the competencies and the responsibilities for that hazard mitigation personnel are all in the fire code. That was made a part of what is going to be required. So it's very clear of the experience, the expertise, and specifically to Casey's point, it calls out that hazard mitigation personnel has to understand incident command. They've got to be able to work in that structure and provide that information, and then they're connecting back to that central answering point that has all this data. And they're getting that real time and translating it so that it makes sense, so that they're giving that right information to the incident commander on scene. But again, those requirements were built into the state fire code, which I think is really, really another critical component.
Thanks, Bruce. I know that Nick wanted to jump in, and then I'm going to go back to Casey. Thanks, Casey.
I was just going to say, David, because I think you brought up a good point. Yeah, when we were developing this and when we extracted it from New York City, New York City is, FDNY is a full-time, fully staffed fire department, but we also said this could still work for municipal departments that are reliant on volunteer departments, right? This doesn't necessarily mean that you need to have an outfit like FDNY to manage an incident or to be able to properly respond. The hazard support personnel is that key member, right? Is that critical component to connect that, whether you're a volunteer department, whether you're a full-time staff department, the hazard support personnel is going to give you the guidance, but also is going to allow you to manage the incident, give you guidance on what to do, but also alleviate you from the scene, not to expel a tremendous amount of resources at one facility during one event. So when we were looking at that, we weren't just looking at what we did in New York City, but we were like, this has to fit on Long Island, this has to fit in the downstate New York, but also throughout the rest of the state. And we knew that when we were developing that, when we had a lot of conversations about that. The fact of having a hazard support personnel facilitates maybe a smaller department, a volunteers department, to be comfortable to say, this is going to be in my jurisdiction. We're going to do everything that we can do to protect life and property, but we feel comfortable now that we have that subject matter expert that's going to provide us with that guidance and show up on site if needed.
Thanks, Nick. Casey, please.
And I just want to add to this and directly address the issue of career departments and volunteer departments. And by the way, in the bios as we're going through, Chief Loftus, FDNY, one of the largest fire departments in the world, but we also have Chief Johnson here, Bruce, was the chief of his volunteer fire department. I was a live-in volunteer fire department in my younger days, but it's been a while. But I just want to say, at NFPA, there's approximately 300 codes and standards, national codes and standards, addressing everything in the built environment. 1/3 of those standards and codes are on the fire service, addressing everything that the fire service does today, whether it's professional qualifications of firefighters or arson investigators or dispatchers or mechanics or you name it, as well as training, as well as apparatus, as well as PPE, as well as deployment. All of those are addressed by NFPA standards. Our perspective has always been it's the same. If there's a line of duty death, it does not matter if that occurs in the smallest volunteer department or the largest career department. It does not matter. The fire department is completely the same across the board. Now, we recognize that resources are hard to come by for volunteer departments, for sure. And especially, and I do want to say, Long Island's a bit of an anomaly in that. Because of whatever, your tax structures and other things. You tend to be more resourced, but not having the staff to get to calls and the deployment side. But here we are with battery energy storage systems. That's not a real issue that we're really facing, this rapid response and some other parts of this, because that's not the kind of events we're talking about here. And we're back to the requirements in the New York State Code in terms of training, in terms of emergency response plans, in terms of pre-planning, and all those requirements, they're significant. And so we do not expect any volunteer fire department to be showing up saying, well, what's happening? What do we do? That should never happen.
You brought up first responder training. Maybe we should shift over to that. How critical is first responder training? Because what I'm learning here, obviously, is we have the data. Now with the 2025 Fire Code, we have the process in place and the subject matter experts placed into their roles, right? So what exactly is the critical part and challenge and the things we must make sure we get it right in New York State in first responder training?
David, I think one of the big lessons learned that we had in this industry, the development of NFPA 855, the development of the rule, the work that we've done with UL stepped up to the plate and instrumentally, created the 9540A test method and the 9540 standards, which are used, throughout the world today. There was a very significant event that happened in 2019 in Peoria and Surprise, Arizona, which was the APS facility, right? Unfortunately, a number of firefighters, HAZMAT special teams had responded to a battery energy storage system facility. There was no prior, emergency response planning, no BIC card on site, no subject matter expert. That event made waves in this industry where, unfortunately, there was 4 firefighters that were seriously injured. Thankfully, I think they've all returned to full duty service now. But I remember where I was when that event happened. I was actually at FDNY. We were having a battery energy storage system day, and we were talking about energy storage systems because at that point we had the rule that was being in development. My boss, Paul Rogers, takes me to the side and he goes, there was an incident in Arizona, 4 firefighters seriously injured, battery energy storage system. Oh boy, what happened? We ended up getting more information about that. At that time, we were in parallel developing the New York State the New York City Fire Code 608. But when we were getting more information about what happened, it sort of validated our efforts that what we were doing in New York City and telling us we were on the right track. Because not only just some of the fire protection features that we were implemented that were adopted into the New York State Code, like automatic alarm, central station monitoring, BMS monitoring, emergency response training, right, and site familiarization drills, making sure that the fire department knows what's in their jurisdiction, understands the technology, has access to a really robust emergency response plan, and like Chief Loftus said, they respond to an incident, they're going to know exactly what to do. It's going to be like clockwork. We're going to do X, Y, and Z. We're going to get in contact with our hazard support personnel. We're not going to get into the facility like any power generating facility. We're not just going to go in guns blazing. We're going to understand the technology. And I think that event has created such important waves throughout this industry that we've been utilizing to this day because it is one of the most important ones, making sure our firefighters are safe.
And Nick, if I can just add to that. So one of the things that UL has is we have a research institute, and we have our Fire Safety Research Institute under direction of Steve Kerber. Some of you may recognize that name. And UL, the Research Institute, was actually asked to go out and do a post-investigation of that event and create a bunch of recommendations. So that report and the recommendations are available on the UL's Fire Safety Research Institute on the website, still there today. And because of that, the Research Institute also generated some training programs which are all free and available online, some of them funded by the FEMA RAC grant, where firefighters today can go, whether you're a chief, a line officer, or a firefighter on your first year of service, and get the training that you really need to know about energy storage and what we know from actual research and data. So that's available, and I encourage everybody to review that if you haven't.
Thanks, Bruce, for that resource.
David, can I just add something really quick?
Absolutely.
Just, what I want to say is fire departments are well known to share information, right? And this is kind of a public service, but we share information. I'm willing to share whatever I have to a department for safety purposes. What they did in Surprise, Arizona, was they did that. They came out and said, hey, this is what happened. We don't want this to happen to someone else. So what I always do is encourage industry to do the same, is to share data, share failures. It makes everything safer, right? So that's just a little public service announcement.
Well, if I shared all the failures in my life, we'd be here for a while, so I'll hold off on that.
Only business-wise.
I'm curious to know, when you say first responder training, maybe Chief Loftus, you can kick us off here. Are you talking about more general training on how to approach an energy storage potential incident? Or are you talking about the training for a specific project that is more critical?
Yeah, so we do both. Okay, so we do both. Training is you talk to any fire department, I know some firefighters in here, they will tell you it's imperative. It's the most important thing we do. You say you rise to the level of your training, right? You want these things to be, nothing's gonna be second nature when it comes to this. A house fire now has become second nature to most of us. A gas leak has become second nature to us. An electrical fire, on and on and on, has become second nature. This is something, luckily, we haven't had an issue, right? We haven't had a battery energy storage system failure.
I would argue it's not luck, Chief.
I'm sorry?
I would argue it's not luck.
Yes. Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. And it is. It's preparation, so on. So when we come to training, what I try to do is get as much data as I can, educate myself, the team around me, the other firefighters and chiefs and lieutenants and so on and so forth. We gather as much information, and what we do is we train them in multiple ways. One is we put out a document, right? Documents are good. You read it, you don't read it, whatever. My personal thing is face-to-face. I like going face-to-face, bringing people to the site. We call it a familiarization drill. That's done. To every battery energy storage system, we come with a familiarization drill. What does that mean is we bring the local units in, and we tell them, hey, this is what we want you to do. Firefighters are notorious for not doing nothing. They like to do things. I'm one of them. It's hard for me to even sit here. I want to stand. You know, it's just in our nature, right? We want to move. So when it comes to that, and when we say, hey, hold off, don't do this. We don't want to add water to this. We don't want to. The main thing at those is training-wise is let's not respond to that. Let's wait for the subject matter expert. We're going to be there, and it's surrounding properties. It's the exposures, which every fire, we always have to check the exposures. It's part of the job, right? But there is exposure protection, right? And that's where the training comes in. It's to say, hold off, don't do that, step back a little bit, and protect the exposures.
Thank you. We all know about the challenges with the local fire department and volunteer firemen and women, where there is a bit of a revolving door there, right? So maybe, Nick, can you speak to how the code addresses that, please?
Yeah, I think we understand there's turnover. I think a really important part is regular training. Not only the initial training, but reoccurring training. I think reoccurring training is one of the important aspects that we had implemented into the code to make sure that there is sort of that connection with any potential turnover right there. So, you know, maybe the facility changes, maybe the facility is exactly the same, but we have different shifts within a department. We'll train all the different shifts, but also we do that training often at a minimum yearly, just to make sure that, you know, that information is fresh, right? We don't just set it and forget it, right? There's that connection to it. So I think regular recurring training is a critical part of that.
You know, that sort of triggers another thought I have with reoccurring. I think in the codes it also talked about reoccurring inspections. Should we discuss that? Who would like to talk about that? I know, Casey, you want to talk about everything here, but you know. And maybe Chief Loftus, if we took away your chair, would you be happier? Because we could do that if you want.
So, David, I'll take a quick shot at that. I think, you know, one of the things that's a really benefit in the New York Fire Code in particular is the number of both construction and operating permits that are part of that process. And when it comes to energy storage, again, that's making the connection now so that we've got an understanding of the code requirements. The permit really becomes the mechanism for that, you know, communication and oversight. And the construction permit obviously gets you through the commissioning part. When you have operating permits or operational permits, the jurisdiction can decide what frequency that they want to have for site visits and inspections, but it gives that mechanism to say, based on our local circumstances, how often do we need to visit this particular energy storage system? And I think, again, going back to my point, there could be inspections for code compliance, which is going to come more from the fire marshals or the building officials. There's also a component there to, you know, tie in the code requirements in Chapter 4 for the emergency planning with those local responders so that this is the mechanism to make all of that happen as often as necessary based on the local circumstances. So I think the code does a really good job of doing that across a lot of operations or hazards, and energy storage is right in that center lane.
Thanks, Bruce. I'd like to move over to a couple different areas here. One is the emergency response plan that is now mandatory. The other is what we call a peer review, but maybe for the audience, it's a desktop review, which is now mandatory. Both were voluntary before the codes came out. When we inspected the 57 projects, and we did with your team as well, Nick, boy, did I learn a lot from just the unique perspective of a firefighter and how they look at a site, and just driving up, like Mike on your team. He'd be like, oh, we need the proper drainage, a fire truck needs to turn around, we need to widen this, talk about the fenced area, the signage, everything. And boy, did I learn a lot there. Of which, so did NYSERDA, by the way. We took those 57 inspections and really took all the data from them and tried to better understand how could we do our inspection, because NYSERDA does mandatory inspections on all the large projects. No exceptions made, and we don't pay out any money to that project until we feel it's inspected, and if there's any issues, they have to address those issues before we pay out the money. And what we also discovered is, and understandably so, authorities having jurisdiction don't have sometimes the level of expertise needed to do a proper desktop review or even review a review. So again, not only did NYSERDA improve our inspections, but we also made it mandatory that NYSERDA is going to bring in who we feel are the 3 most qualified contractors in the country to do those peer reviews, and we hand them over to the community with a summary report. So like, those are critical. I just want to hear from the panels about those 2 items, right?
Well, I'll start by just succinctly saying the emergency response plan, ERP, is what everybody does on game day. And it's just crystal clear, and it needs to be pre-planned out and very clearly addressed beforehand. Peer review gets us back to the whole design process. And it's quality control, and it's quality assurance. And again, this is a robust requirement in the current New York State Fire Code. And this is done in other areas, and it should be done here, and it is being done.
Just to add to your point, Casey, because I can't stress that point enough, coming from a previous AHJ position, right, when I was working at the New York City Fire Department, I was very lucky to work for a department that would facilitate knowledge learning, right? So I sat with people like Chief Loftus and really knowledgeable people on these codes and standards. So when you look at the international fire codes, when you look at 855 and the NFPA standards, there's New York City Fire Department representation on there. And it's tremendous institutional knowledge that the FDNY has obtained, right? And also, they sort of have a peer review process as well, because they're not the only jurisdiction. There's also the Department of Buildings as well. There's other people reviewing it. But the peer review process, especially for building authorities or building AHJs that are going to have this technology come across their desk, and it's very daunting. It's like, this is technically complicated, right? We don't want them to feel overwhelmed. We want to make sure that they're comfortable. So the state has implemented a mandatory, right? It's mandatory now for the peer review, a mandatory peer review with these subject matter experts to give that, that authority having jurisdiction the confidence to say, it's not just me looking at this. I have help, I have support, I have a third party, independent third party that's going to look at it, checks and balances, make sure that we're compliant, make sure that we have all of our safety standards in place. So it's a really good one.
Casey, if you're doing a peer review, what are you looking at?
So in terms of, this is where, as a fire protection engineer, you step back, you be very clear what you're looking at in terms of the hazard, and defining that and making sure that you know all aspects about that hazard and how that plays out for this facility. But as you go deeper into what's required, what's not required, you're providing, again, that quality assurance that it is meeting all those requirements and more. And because, again, these are minimums. They're baseline minimums that we're providing in this state code and so forth. So this is where, and I just want to also step back, because this was honestly a role that I, as NFPA staff, would serve over, again, 3.5 decades. And I would regularly, every day, talk to someone like the other 3 panelists when they were in an AHJ or fire service role, trying to clarify details that may have been important to them. This is the extra ability to address all those with qualified professionals that are providing the support that AHJs and others need and should be leveraging.
All right, I'm going to, I don't know if we want to discuss any more about the peer review, because I know it's so important, or the emergency response plan. But if there is something else, let's speak up about it, because I know that it's very critical. After that, Bruce, the spotlight I'd like to shine on is you. I want to talk about UL testing, because that is a big part of what you're reviewing in that desktop review. But, yeah, go ahead.
Just real quick, David, because so a thought came to my mind, because we do a lot of outreach, we do a lot of public speaking about energy storage system safety, all of these safety standards that we have in this testing and all that. And I think a lot of the reluctance from the public is that they think that these systems are just going to be installed and plopped into place without any thought, right? And I think that's where the peer review and the codes and standards come into play to show, no, this is actually an extremely highly regulated product, a very highly regulated installation with a tremendous amount of, I call it a Swiss cheese analogy, right? We have a tremendous amount of layers of safety that we have implemented for this facility and planning and from cradle to grave, right? From the construction part of it, from the design part of it, all the way to end of life and to decommissioning, right? So there's a tremendous amount of thought and standard of care that's implemented for these facilities. So I think that's one thing that needs to get out there to the public, is that they're not just plopped down and installed and forgotten about. There's a tremendous amount that goes in right from the inception of it all the way to the end when it's removed from its site.
And I do want to just add one other item that comes up all the time, but it's mandated by NFPA 55 as well as New York State Code is a hazard mitigation analysis. Well, what is that term? But you hear it all the time, an HMA. It's mandated. It must be provided, and it's got the details of what that is. But that's used during the peer review process and the whole approval process in terms of being very clear what the hazard is and what happens when different things don't function or whatever, and what are the mitigation steps that are taken to address when something happens adversely. And so that's the hazard mitigation analysis, the HMA, and that's provided as well.
If it's okay with you, let's move over to the testing part of this. I mean, testing is very critical. There's a couple components I think that we should first start out talking about. Bruce, there's 9540 and there's 9540A. If you could please eloquently explain to the audience what the two are and the differences. And then second, I would really like to learn from either Chief Loftus or Nick, what was FDNY's role in helping, Nick, I know we've talked about this behind the scenes. He's going to wax poetically on this one. But I'm just curious about, could you set the stage literally about the testing that your organization provides, why you provide it, and what the difference is between the two? And then maybe, Nick, you could follow up with, your experience working with UL.
Thank you, Dave. I think there was about 20 questions in there.
I didn't mean that. I'm sorry. I'm trying to be a good moderator here.
So, setting the stage, first of all, UL as an enterprise has 3 different parts of that enterprise. I already mentioned the research institutes. We have our standard development side, standards and engagement. The name matches the function. And that is an SDO that actually develops standards like UL 9540, 9540A that we're going to talk about. And that's a consensus process. UL standards and engagement host subject matter experts that use a ANSI consensus process to develop those standards. And Nick serves on those committees from the initial technical committee being formed through today. And then there's UL Solutions, which is actually the testing laboratory. So they are related. We call it a power of 3, but they're independent. Standards in development is different from research institutes, different than the testing laboratory. So with that, 9540 is the system approach to evaluating energy storage or battery energy storage systems. And really where that's so critical, and I think the results is, as David mentioned briefly, it's not a coincidence or an accident that we're not having catastrophic failures of energy storage. A big part of that, in addition to all the code requirements, is the testing that's required to be certified or listed to 9540. And 9540 starts out by looking at all of the components that are integral to an energy storage system. And there are individual certifications for the batteries, for the inverters, all of the pieces that go in. So their safety and function is evaluated. But then on the system approach, we also say, well, we know that they work independently. What happens when we put them together as an energy storage system? And that could also include other parts of required deflagration prevention or venting. That could include different types of suppression, different types of detection, as Casey was mentioning. So all of those would have independent certification or listing, but now we see how it works on a system approach. And that's really key. So when that energy storage system and all of its very specific components have been certified to 9540 by an approved, or let's say a nationally recognized testing laboratory, there's a higher level of assurance that you're going to get the necessary safety and performance of that battery energy storage system. So that's really, the high-level overview of 9540. And it's very detailed, very long. It talks about how we evaluate all of those things, pass, fail, and it's very, very sensitive. Nothing is close enough. It's all science based on data, and all the pass-fail criteria need to be met to have a certification to 9540. To David's other question about 9540A, that is a test standard that's specific to evaluating thermal runaway events in a battery energy storage system. And very quickly, as 855 was being developed in the NFPA through the technical committee, and UL was developing 9540, it became obvious that some level of fire testing data would be helpful. It might be helpful to show that different chemistries maybe have a different hazard mitigation, but how do you validate that through some testing? And it was kind of an anecdotal quip, but some discussion out there was, hey, we're going to light a battery management system on fire in the parking lot. If it doesn't burn too bad, we'll say that's pretty good. Well, that's not really scientific. So that was the motivation for UL to bring a bunch of stakeholders together and say, we need to have a test that is science-based, it's validated, that's going to collect data, done in a laboratory under controlled conditions so that there is data to evaluate the different hazards, and that ties into hazard mitigation and peer review. And very quickly, the 9540A test is actually a 4-level test. It starts by the individual battery, and it's evaluating the cell, putting it into thermal runaway, seeing what is released in terms of the thermal energy, heat release rate, all the toxic gases. Based on that, then it goes to a module test. They do the same thing with the module. They collect data. Based on that data, they decide what a unit level test needs to be. And then finally, the fourth part is an installation level test, which also will evaluate the other pieces like detection, suppression or fire control, deflagration prevention or venting. So through that 4 sets of testing, which by the way are very expensive, these things when you burn them up, it's not cheap, but that produces a lot of data. And then to the peer review, analyzing a report from all 4 of those could be several hundred pages of data. So you need that engineering, judgment and the peer review to translate that for the code official to say, really, what are the hazards? What mitigations are in place? Am I comfortable with that installation based on certification and test data that, I'm comfortable that this operation is going to be safe, and I know when, I have a hazard mitigation plan and a response plan, what I'm going to do in unlikely event of an incident. So that's kind of how it lays out in a high level.
And if I could just add to that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Bruce, but I look at UL in this, because there was a lot there, and just to sort of unpack that for a moment for the audience, I look at UL 9540 much like other things that get tested, and I don't want to compare it to a toaster or anything like that, but it's like you don't want it to electrocute people. You don't want it to do all these different hazards that aren't, exactly the fire issue, but among them would be fire. That's UL 9540 as a test, and it's a thumbs up or thumbs down, that UL gives that listing, and the HJ and the community and everybody out there can trust that. UL 9540A collects data, and it's not a pass-fail standard, and it collects that data, and that data is used directly by the codes. In terms of the requirements that are, it feeds into the requirements for the codes in terms of spacing and, other issues. So I just want to say the other key point that I want to add here, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're sitting in this room, you look around, and most of this material in this room, the wall coverings, the ceilings, the cushions that you're sitting on, all of that goes through UL testing. And the authorities having jurisdiction, when they approved this room, they got approvals on all of that material, that it went through the proper fire test documents, the UL standards. And what that does assure us is that, we're not going to have the station nightclub or something happen here because of the wall coverings and soundproofing. And so that's hugely important. But the key part here is that those tests, they're what we call small scale and mid scale. And they're done hundreds, thousands of all this material in the built environment. Rarely do we ever do large scale, which is, as Bruce said, it's really expensive. But it's like, you got to do it. We don't care if it's expensive. You got to burn the whole thing and, show us what it can do. And we want that data. And the code requires that.
Thanks, Casey. I was even going to ask that question because it's such a critical part is just testing in general. How odd is this that we burn millions of dollars of equipment to get an answer? So I appreciate that. I do, because I just want to keep check on time. We have about 15 minutes. Casey, I want to give you the opportunity to summarize this panel, which we appreciate. And we want to make sure there's questions are piling in right now, so we have time to answer questions. Nick, I did ask you, I know, just 1 minute. What was your influence on UL?
I was just a very small part of that puzzle piece, but I keep on pointing out Paul Rogers, who's there. He's a retired HAZMAT lieutenant. He's a co-founder, principal
stand
co-founder.
up, Paul? Come on,
Well,
everybody.
Everybody knows Paul Rogers in this industry.
The brain trust.
Real quick, back in 2015-16, we had no safety standards. The manufacturers were coming into New York City. We want to install this in New York City, right? So we sat down in headquarters and we were talking about the technology. He asked them, he goes, does this burn? And lo and behold, what did they tell us back then? No, this doesn't burn. All right, prove it to us. And that's where I think, a lot of those movements came into place where UL stepped up to the plate, developed this full-scale fire test method, and now it's a level playing field. It's not just, trust us. Now it is, everybody has to meet that same standard, and it's based on sound data, and we have good engineering judgment, and we understand the hazards.
All right, Casey, you want to just do a quick wrap up here, and then I'd love to get to some really good questions from the audience.
Well, sure. And so I'm going to be very brief with this. And part of this goes back to even what we heard with the keynote and the opening session here, because it did set the table on some of these issues. But I want to just start, as we dived deeper into certain specific issues, and David, you rattled these off at the beginning with the peer review and the emergency response and the, we'll call it the white hat or the SME, but also what's going on with battery management systems and all that data that's there that we have at our fingertips. As well as what happens on game day and the fire management, if indeed we are at that point, but also the training and the emergency response that goes into that. So we really did cover the gamut on these issues, and there are other key sub-details we addressed, such as the fire service in general, and volunteer and career departments and so forth. and recognizing that. But I do think a key part of this, and it's been emphasized a number of times and mentioned in the keynote as well as here at the panel, is the New York State Code. It is impressive, and I'm going to just, I'll go on the record saying, from my perspective, from somebody that does travel the country and other countries, they look over their shoulder. It's like, well, wait a minute, this is what we want. And I speak this from the standpoint of what I'll call the safety infrastructure, that I think New York State has done a very commendable job here with this addition that's about to come into force with the New York State Fire Code. And it has addressed all these key issues that were brought forward by the Fire Safety Working Group. I printed out a copy, and I was reviewing it beforehand. It's like, I see it all. It's there. And more. Like the closed circuit TV, by the way. It's just like an easy thing. And it's like, let's just put it in. Let's do this. So it's, we've covered all these issues. But I just, and I said I was honored to be here with this distinguished panel. I'm also honored to be here and talking about the New York State Fire Code, because I think it's a great accomplishment.
Thank you so much, Casey. And I do think that, Chief Loftus, you probably get a Ring system for Christmas from Casey for CCTV. But I do agree with him. I think it is critical in that point. But anyway, really good questions. And it's interesting because a lot of the people in the audience have the same name, Anonymous, but that's good. So a lot of the questions we're getting are around the concern of volunteer firefighters here in Long Island. I will read one of these, but I think that'll address many of them. Long Island has 179 volunteer fire departments of various sizes and shapes. We don't have the resources and on-duty staffing that FDNY has. Can the panel address how a local volunteer department can address training, familiarization, and if need be, at an incident operationally?
I mean, that's exactly what we talked about with the hazard support personnel, right? I think that is the key. In conjunction with the emergency response planning, in conjunction with all of the fire safety systems that we've already implemented into the facility, the layout, the fire protection systems, the hazard mitigation analysis, understanding the technology, a well-trained fire department that has that, ace up their sleeve, that hazard support personnel, we train fire departments in rural areas where the fire department is 30 minutes away, right? We do a lot of these trainings other departments in other places in the country, and this is exactly why we implemented this into New York State, is that hazard support personnel and that training, that emergency response planning, and also the best practices, industry best practices on how to manage this technology, which goes back to all the testing of it and the understanding of how they fail and what happens when they do fail, and the defensive fire department, defensive firefighting procedures that we recommend. That gives even smaller departments the capabilities to say, we understand this technology. Now that we have proper training, we have this subject matter expert helping us out, we are comfortable. We know that we can handle any event if it were to happen. Even though it's highly unlikely, they'll be prepared.
And if there's anyone from a local fire department here that can, has ideas or wants to talk further about it, obviously we'll be here for the event. Love to discuss your thoughts there. And if there's anything we as a state could do better, so please, I'll be around. The next question is, can you clarify, every best project has an expert who knows that specific project inside and out. Who will work with the local fire departments in case of emergency? Also, who provides the battery energy storage trainings to the local fire department? Thank you.
Yeah, that's one of the same. It's that hazard support personnel is involved in that process from day one. In the development of the site plan, in the code compliance aspect of it, they're the ones that are providing that training. They're also the ones that understand all of these really complicated things that we were talking about: fire protection systems, explosion protection, 9548 testing. They're really that very instrumental team. And we do say team because, if you are a hazard support personnel, it's not just one person. ESRG, we provide similar services. We provide certificate of fitness services. We provide hazard support personnel. It's not just one person with that phone because you also don't want them to be on vacation. You want continuity. So you have multiple people on a 24/7 line that reciprocates, that is always going to have somebody available, somebody that's familiar with the project, that was there for the training, that was there for the site familiarization, to be that consistency, right, that connection.
I think what I'm hearing from these questions is, okay, the state code says there has to be someone involved, but how do we draw a direct line to that person and how it pertains to a local fire department with volunteers?
Yeah, and David, if I can take that, I think, there's a number of opportunities. As I mentioned earlier, the UL Fire Safety Research Institute has online training. And I think that's, a great place to go. Volunteers can take that at their own time. I think there's certainly opportunities for NYSERDA to maybe create some, of that similar type of training and make it available online or on site if necessary. Opportunities to do a training program in every county around the state. That takes time and resources, but I think it's an opportunity, to help address that and really get a comfort level out there that the right information is getting in the hands of those volunteer firefighters. And I also think if you look at analogies, there is, organizational training that's been a long time from NFPA on EVs, long before we got into lithium-ion batteries. But I think that there's also opportunities. A lot of the manufacturers of these energy storage systems, they are another source of information, just general, not site-specific, about their particular systems and, the hazards and the response things that they would be looking for and the information that emergency responders need. So I think there's a number of sources, and maybe the goal here is just to kind of connect those and really make it easy to access for all the firefighters across New York State.
I will add that Office of Fire Prevention and Control also has training. So that's another resource. Casey, did you want to jump in?
Well, I was only going to add that I think this is an important point for NYSERDA because as we go through and I think of the places that I've been to around the United States that have, they're very rural with volunteer fire departments in Maine, Tennessee, Virginia, New Mexico, Arizona, Washington State, and so on. And meeting with fire service members, but we meet with them early, and that's hugely important. And when there's pushback from the local community, who are the first people that they turn to? Their trusted fire department and fire chief and so forth. So it's hugely important, that this is an issue that is clarified and addressed. So what the fire service needs and what the AHJs need here is really important and something that we should all be very tuned into.
Thank you, Casey. As I scan the questions, there seems to be another theme of several questions that talk about environmental impacts, and I think it's worthy of addressing that. The public is concerned about the chemical compounds released into the air and the ground when a fire occurs, along with the duration of the fire and what they believe is a radius of those who would need to be evacuated for a prolonged time. Can you address these concerns? I know we talk about this a lot.
Oh, yeah. This is a hot topic item. I think, unfortunately, we had a number of events in New York State in 2023 that sort of set all of these in motion. One of the benefits of these events that have happened, Chameau, Warwick, East Hampton, is that there was an extensive amount of monitoring conducted during the event, post-event, root cause analyses, but also publicly available data. And I think New York is very important, played a very important role for not only being very transparent with what the events happened and what was the root cause of that, but also the impacts of that. And I think all of these reports are publicly available, very lengthy reports, but at a minimum, what we see from these reports is that the impacts of those events didn't extend anywhere past the boundary, the facility boundary itself, right? And I think that goes in alignment with our understanding of energy storage systems, the large-scale fire testing that's being conducted. A fire is a fire. There's always going to be toxic components of a fire. This room itself has a tremendous amount of foams and plastics and furnishings and things like that, where it's really, whenever things burn, there's going to be components of toxicity in it. The benefits of battery energy storage systems is we're going with our fire protection approach of compartmentalization, right? We are isolating these blocks. We are limiting the fire load. We're making sure that the fire doesn't jump from one to the other. But as concerned fire departments and concerned residents, what does that smoke look like? I think the information that was obtained during these events, but also the information that can be obtained from a fire department's handheld gas monitoring, right? Typical things that we would take signatures of carbon monoxide. The fire department will be well equipped to make a good assessment of the failure, of how far away that failure is impacting it. Do they need to do anything special with their exposures? From what we've seen from the events that have happened and from the data that was released, we're not seeing any of those toxic components being mitigated outside of the facility boundary. It stayed within the boundary. And also one of the big ones, every single fire department member has gone home safe from those events. I like to consider these successful failures, even though it's a word that's very unique in this industry. We had every single fire service member go back home safe that day, no reported injuries from any of those events, and there was a tremendous amount of lessons learned.
And Nick, yeah, that's the first milestone delivery we had with the Fire Safety Working Group, and the conclusion through looking all that data was obviously no levels of concern of contaminants, no known 9/11 calls, no emergency room visits, no one harmed, which was great, right? That's really important. There's another question about Moss Landing, because that keeps coming up, right? And there's been some other incidents around the world. Are we seeing similar results in the environmental impacts for what we noticed and saw through the data here in New York State and other areas as well? Or maybe, is that, Bruce, did you want to take that?
Yeah, just, to set the stage there, so Moss Landing was built a rather long time ago. And it was really constructed before we had a lot of the mitigation requirements that are now in place. 9540, 9540A, 855, none of those codes or standards existed at the time of Moss Landing. So we have to keep that in the background of, that event, that facility may not have had all the features that if it was sited today, that it would need to have to meet codes and standards. So I think, setting the stage there, but I'll defer to Nick or Casey about, or even Chief Loftus. The data has been slow to come out because there's a lot of lawsuits, but I don't think that there was any significant environmental impact outside of that facility that, again, would need to be a concern for the event having, consequences outside of the actual facility boundaries.
And I just want to add to that, because Moss Landing is a unique facility. I'm not aware of anything else like it in the world where they took the old turbine buildings and some of the old structures from the former power plant that was there. But in terms of the environmental issues, which, as Bruce was mentioning, are still, there's a lot of discussion and debate on that. But this was an operating power plant for over 3 decades. And that's a confounding factor. And we're back to some of the statements that were made by the keynote speakers in the beginning. I've been in coal plants. I've been in gas plants and oil plants. It's huge, the amount of stuff that we burn to make that electricity. It's unbelievable. And I'm just saying, that's a confounding factor around any fossil burning power plant. Or, so this is an issue as well.
I think we have time for one quick question, and I'm only going to bring it up because it's sort of very much matches what you say. Is there anything about battery energy storage that needs to be specially addressed above and beyond substations and commercial electrical infrastructure that utilities put in place?
I'm not sure who wants to take that, but I guess I don't, personally, when I see especially outdoor exterior cabinets, I look at them and I see them the same as I see cabinets for traffic light controls. It's like, don't go in that thing, and it's just, it's off limits. And I get it that there's a lot more of it at a battery energy storage facility, but it effectively is just a big reservoir like we do with water. It's just electricity, and it's pumping it in, pumping it out, pumping it in, pumping it out. And, this thing should go through its entire life and be clean. and not have a problem. And that's, what this panel is all about. We don't want those problems. We get that. But, at the end of the day, I personally, I don't want to see more fossil plants. I'm just one of those people. So, I think it's important, that we find our pathway forward as a civilization with this issue.
Yeah. And I think just to Casey's point, we're in a really good spot. The codes and standards that we have now, especially the 2025 New York State Code, I think we're at the highest level of standard and care. And with the multiple levels of protection, with sort of cradle to grave care about these systems, I think we're in a really good spot. It is complex, it is technical. I think that's also why the state has the mandatory peer review process to get another set of eyes on this very highly complex and technical requirements and installation. But I do think that where we are right now with the codes and standards, we're in a really good spot. And I think the EPRI database, which is publicly available, Electric Power Research Institute, is also tracking all the failures, but also is tracking all the deployments. And you can see from this publicly available third-party database that energy storage is increasing exponentially, but also the failure rates are decreasing exponentially as well. And we're at a really good spot percentage-wise, significantly reducing the numbers of failures that occur. So I think we're definitely trending in the right direction. I think we're in a really good spot right now with codes and standards.
Well, let's just end it there. Thank you very much. We are at time. I do want to, just a special thanks to our panelists. We've got Casey, Chief Loftus, Bruce, and Nick. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's been an honor for me to be on stage with you.